Alright, so hi everyone. Tonight's beginner's training is a guide to PM speeches. My name is Anis and I will inshallah try my best to introduce you guys to what makes a good PM speech and how would that speech look. What exactly are things that you need to do in a Prime Minister's speech and why exactly is it important for you to always have or to always be able to make a good Prime Minister speech, even if it's not exactly the role that you are going for in any tournament. So before I start, I would just like to have a brief idea of what you know about Prime Minister speeches. What are your previous experiences, or what do you think about Prime Minister speeches in general? Like, is it scary? Is it structured? Do you not like being the first person to speak in a debate room? So please feel free to have at least like 2 to 3 people speak up and tell me what do you think about a Prime Minister speech.
Can I try?
Yeah, sure. There's no right or wrong. So okay.
Okay. So basically, what I know about Prime Minister speeches are basically like how the debate would be going on based on what Prime Minister stated in his contextualized or like Prime Minister has the power and authority to set up the direction of the debate on how it's going on, and practically he's the only one that doesn't have to rebut anyone else. So yeah, that's it.
All right. Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you so much, Alicia. Anyone else wanting to share what they think about a Prime Minister speech before we go further?
Yes.
Yes, Shifa.
Yes. For like the Prime Minister, the person need to understand the motion as good as so that for Prime Minister is the start up point to actually say out what is the motion actually is. So I think that is what the main point for the Prime Minister to start out based on the understanding of the motion.
All right. Okay. Your voice is a bit unclear to me, but I think I get the gist of what you're trying to say. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Right. Thank you, Shifa. Anyone else wanting to share anything that they know? If not, we can go on and start this session. All right. Okay. So we'll go on further, yeah? So, okay. What exactly does a Prime Minister do? And what are you expected to have in your speech? What are you expected to do as a Prime Minister in general? So the first thing that a Prime Minister needs to do, though not something that they do directly in a debate itself, is that they need to be in charge and to lead the prep. So I'll go on further later to tell you why exactly is this so, but this is just a brief outline of what we're going to discuss in our session today. The second thing that the Prime Minister needs to do, and technically the first thing that they will be doing in the speech itself, is to set up the case. How exactly do you want to define certain things, or do you want to introduce certain stakeholders in your debate? Then you have modeling, whereby you introduce certain models that you want or that you feel is most important for a certain motion to work and or for the motion to go onto your site, for example. And then we go on to substantives. How exactly can you better analyze your substantives? By doing 2 things. The first is to characterize the key actors, and the second thing is to prove the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And the last thing, but technically this isn't something that you should put last in your speeches. This is just an additional thing that you need to consider while prepping and while delivering the speech, is that you have to consider preemptions. All right, so let's go on towards the first thing, which is leading the prep. Before that, if you have questions at any point, you are more than welcome to ask me at any point of time. Or if you want to keep your questions for later after the session has ended, that would also be fine. But interject me if you feel like I'm not being clear on something or if you need further examples. All right, so on the first part, which is how exactly do you interact in prep? So I always feel like as Prime Minister, it's very important that you are the one who is leading the prep, because while your teammates all might have different styles of speaking, or they might have different things that they would put first if they were to become the Prime Minister, the structure of a speech depends on how clear you are about the prep in the first place. So if you find that, I think a lot of people say this as well, how good or how effective a prep is dependent on the Prime Minister's speech. So if the debate prep wasn't going well, or if it was messy, if you didn't have a lot of things that you discussed on during prep, it would more often than not reflect in your prime minister's speech. And the opposite is also true, whereby if you are actually able to have a effective prep, you are able to detail and analyze your points perfectly well within your prep, then you would definitely be able to show that within your prime minister's speech as well. So as the first speaker, the case direction depends on you, and you must always ask yourself, how exactly do you want your speech to go? And while there is a certain truth in the fact that you must have a certain structure, or you must be a clear speaker when you're the prime minister, or likewise if you're the leader of opposition, for example, you need to know what exactly are you most comfortable with putting first, and what are the things that you need to say first in order for everything else to make sense. So how do you lead the prep? The first is that you have to communicate with your teammate or teammates, depending on whether it's AP or BP. I feel like prime minister role never actually differs regardless of what type of parliamentary debate it is. So the first thing is you communicate with your teammate, tell them what exactly do you think needs to be done first. Yeah, so here, this is basically what I said earlier. A good PM speech is equals to a good prep. So you tell them what exactly do you think you should discuss on first, because sometimes you have teammates that might want to go straight into preemptions first, or you might have teammates who immediately think of like comparatives or additional benefits that would go like further later on in the speech, right? So what you want to do is that, sure, you can accept what they're saying, but you need to always be the one who takes or who redirects the prep in the right direction, so that you're sure of how exactly would this look in your speech later. The second thing you need to do is you need to listen, ask, and write, because you're the one who's going to deliver it. So while people like your teammate might be saying or telling you a lot of things, so while you're listening, you need to also be sure that you're taking down what exactly are the important things that your teammate is saying, and you structure it in a way in which you can understand and explain it best. So let's say your teammate is already telling you about what are the benefits of X, Y, Z. What you want to do is you can still put that down, but you put that further down in your paper or on your Google Docs if it's an online debate, for example. Just put it down further in order for you to remember, so that you're not going to forget about it when you actually reach that part of the speech later on. The third thing that you need to do is that regardless of how long the prep time is, regardless of whether it's 15 minutes or 30 minutes, you need to always take the last minute of prep to restructure your speech so you can start strong and clear. Because I understand the fact that sometimes you might have teammates who want to tell you something new or who want to share something with you even like right before your speech starts. It's okay to tell them, I don't think I can take more of this as of now. Let me just restructure my speech first, and then I'll ask you if I feel like this can fit anywhere inside my speech. So this is important for you to prioritize your arguments, and that so that you're able to leave any extras to your deputy prime minister. So even though you are the first speaker, we understand that you might not be able to say everything that you want to say. And while we want to maximize our time as much as possible, that is okay. If you feel like there's additional things that you want to have said, but you cannot emphasize strongly enough, to make sure you relay them to your deputy prime minister later on and tell them how exactly would they need to angle or emphasize it, just so that you are still able to get the points across. All right, so are we clear so far as for leading the prep? Any questions so far? All right, okay. So we'll go on towards the next part. So the next part of what exactly is the role of the prime minister comes within the debate itself. So firstly, what you need to do is you need to set up the case. You need to set up what exactly does it look like. So this is called the context of the debate. So this is applicable, but these are the questions that you usually have to ask yourself to understand the context of the debate, but it's not limited to only these questions. So it depends largely on what exactly are you debating about. So if it's a certain issue, for example, like if we are to debate about a certain social protest against the government, what you need to do is you firstly need to understand, where does this happen? Is it happening in a developing country? Is it happening in cities? Is it happening in rural areas? And from that, like once you've identified where exactly does it happen, you can't stop there. You have to go further into like, what exactly do these places look like? What are circumstances which might lead towards like exacerbation of the problem, or any certain like unique values towards that places that you might want to consider in order for you to make more nuances in your speech. Nuances being the kind of differences that are necessary in a specific motion so that it doesn't become too general. The second thing that you want to ask yourself is why exactly does it happen? And often this requires you to have at least a slight understanding of the history of the problem. So if it's about the feminist movement, for example, why exactly are the feminist movement pushing for certain issues? Like, was it because of like historical entrenchment, for example, any sort of oppression that you've been through in the past? What exactly are certain events or like recent events especially that might have changed those circumstances, which is why it's also important to like side note, not necessarily just exclusive with the Prime Minister's speech, in order for you to understand in general why do certain things happen. And the third thing is, when does it happen? When does it happen is very general. Is it something that is recent? Is it something that is unprecedented? Do you need to take into consideration past occurrences of a certain event in order for you to better analyze it? So you have to remember that when you're setting up the case, you cannot squirrel. What does squirrel mean? Squirrel means you make the motion entirely one-sided to the point in which it's unfair or it's undebatable for the opposition side. So whatever context you want to set the debate in, it must be appropriate for both sides. It cannot be a utopian world whereby everything is rainbows and sunshines. But you have to convince the judge that this is the most important and relevant context. This is where the context is more likely to happen. So in a debate about, let's see, what sort of debate? Like, for example, if you were to contextualize a debate about climate change movements, for example, these are things that are more likely happening in developed countries. So when you contextualize something, you need to prove why exactly is it true and why exactly is this the most relevant, so that you don't look as if you're simply setting up the context to benefit the arguments that will materialize from your side. All right. Then the second thing that you want to consider is what exactly are the burdens that you want to take. What are things that you can prove and what are things that you cannot prove in your speech? Because sometimes we tend to have Prime Minister speeches that provide like really unrealistic burdens that is difficult for them to prove, or that is actually unfair for them to set on themselves or onto other teams even. So the three things that you need to remember is that the burdens that you want to take must be achievable. It must be something that you know via your arguments and via your preparation prior to the speech, that it is something that you can prove and that you can achieve by the end of your speech or by the end of your Deputy Prime Minister's speech. Don't try to be overachieving or try to solve all the problems. So select specific problems that you think you can solve and like solutions that you think are logistic and are logical and can be applied in the real world. The second thing is that it must be adequate in your substantive, so that whatever burdens that you're saying, you're not just saying burdens because you want to have something to say. You want to say it because it will be reflected in your substantives or in your speech later on. The third thing that you want to do is that your burden must be something that is necessary. So don't take unnecessary burdens, especially those pushed onto you by the opponent. This happens mostly under leader of opposition speeches, for example, or even deputy speeches, whereby the opposition tell you that you are not taking the right burdens, you should be taking more burdens, or they paint a certain burden on you, like you have to defend this or you have to defend that. You must be able to recognize what exactly is the debate about and why exactly are you not in the place to defend such things. All right, so that is about setting up the case. On to modeling. What exactly is modeling? So modeling is the method or idea or change that you are proposing. So more often than not, this is more evident and more important in policy debates, because when you want to propose a policy, for example, this house would ban something, or like this house would ban violent video games, for example. Modeling is necessary in order for you to illustrate what exactly would it look like, what exactly would the world in which you're creating look like. But it's also necessary in non-policy debates because you want to angle like what exactly is the world that you prefer. So if you want like this house prefers a society which cares more about the urban poor, for example, you want to illustrate, probably doesn't make sense that motion, but yeah, just an example, you want to illustrate how exactly would your world look like in comparison. And in order for you to be able to illustrate it, you need to be able to identify like really important points or really crucial analysis that would be able to make your model look clearer. So how should you do it? So for policy debates, when you want to set up model a certain model, or some might also call it like earlier on, people say that they're mechanizing the debate, for example. What you want to do is that you want to make it concise but clear. So you only include what is necessary and prove why is it necessary. So what exactly is necessary? So when we talk about, for example, this house would allow victims to pardon offenders. So what kind of these victims should be entitled or should be allowed to have like legal counsel. So that is one of the important like safety nets that you want to set up in the debate earlier, and in order for the debate to be able to move forward, right? And why is it necessary? Because it's unfair for them to be able to make decisions that involve like judicial consequences without being able to understand what exactly is the meaning of such decision. So these are things that you want to take into consideration. What are the models? What are the certain safety nets or clarifications that is necessary for your model to work? And why exactly are those bits necessary? The second thing is to defend why your model is not just one of the possible ways to achieve the end goal, but the most important way. Because you have to concede to the fact that whatever you bring into the debate, opposition might have an idea that is the opposite, or that they can see that sure that might work, but our idea or our alternative is much better. So what you need to do, and this you will have to do after concluding your every argument or after justifying your every analysis, is that why exactly is this the most important way? So this means that you have to consistently know what are the impacts of the world that you are trying to create, and how exactly would all of these impacts necessarily become so much better in comparison towards the world in which opposition wants you to see. All right. So that is for modeling. So setting up and modeling are the early parts of your debate speech. This is not yet reaching like the substantives or the points that you are trying to make. So as of so far, do you guys feel like you understand what setting up and modeling looks like? Hold on, let's see if there's a chat. Shuru asked if the recorded version will be available later. I think it would be. I'm not sure when, but hopefully it would. We'll inform you if that's the case. All right. So we'll go forward towards the next part, which is substantives. All right. So I told you earlier that there are two parts to make a good substantive. The first is to characterize key actors, and the second is to prove the outcome. So in characterizing key actors, firstly, where should the characterization be? Because some people, they like to characterize everything in the early half of their speech, even before they reach their substantives. Other people prefer to characterize within their speech. So while they're making certain arguments, like how would the minorities be affected by a certain policy? This is normally where they would actually characterize the minorities, how exactly do they behave, etc. So that's completely up to you, though I would recommend that if you want to have more analysis and like a more structured and complete analysis as a whole, I would recommend that the characterization happen within your substantive instead of externally, because sometimes you might find that after you've characterized everything before you start into your substantive, there might be certain parts whereby it gets repetitive in your speech later on. So if you want to avoid this, have your characterization within substantives instead of identifying and explaining all the key stakeholders or actors before you actually reach your substantive. So what does characterizing key actors look like? So you have to look at who are the people affected, or who are the stakeholders in the debate. So a few things that you need to take notice of. The first is how exactly do they behave. So for example, if we were to talk about a traditional community, how exactly does a traditional community behave? Like they might have more conservative ideas, for example, or they might be more tightly integrated. They could also be family, they could also come from like communities whereby they keep to themselves and they're less open towards interaction towards other people. This entirely depends on how you want to paint them. And of course, you have to make sure that the way in which you're painting the stakeholders are in a manner which is realistic and easy for the judge to follow. Then the second thing that you want to acknowledge is what exactly are the structural reasons for their behavior. So if people were to say that traditional communities are much more tightly integrated in comparison to like irregular community, like a modern community, for example, whereby they're more open and free towards engagement with everyone. So things that you want to prove is why exactly have they been in such a manner. Maybe it's because of the fact that due to urbanization, they don't exactly engage much with people outside of their communities. Therefore, they've developed a very strong sense of trust within their own communities, etc. And then maybe you also want to include the fact that in study school, there might be some sort of like offensive movement against these communities, or like certain stereotypes or stigma towards these communities, which is the reason why they are much likelier to have trust and to be more tightly integrated in comparison to a world, in comparison to actually being open to engagement with others. Then the third thing you want to realize is having analyzed and identified their behavior and the structural reasons for their behavior. Why exactly does your model best suit the needs of these people? So this looks like being able to paint a link between the model that you've wanted, the model that you've actually illustrated early on, and why exactly are these the most, and this is also the part whereby you push forward why exactly does your model makes the most sense because of the very fact that it suits the needs of the people. So take note that your opposition might try to characterize the way these people behave differently, or that they might want to say that our analysis is incomplete or is irrelevant. That's totally fine. I mean, I mean, even if you were to become an opposition, you would always want to paint the picture that that your opponent isn't exactly doing a good job at identifying who are the stakeholders and who are the key actors. So like what I said earlier, what's important is that you paint the picture and you prove at the end of the day why exactly is this the truest and the most important part of the debate. Why exactly do they matter? So why exactly do they matter? It could be the idea of numbers or the idea of vulnerability. So what does this mean, right? This means that in every debate, you need to pick a side as to who exactly are you protecting. And in order for you to justify why exactly do these communities matter, because if you were to look at people who come from minority communities, for example, some people might say that because of the fact that they are minorities, they are smaller in numbers. Why should we care for someone who are smaller in numbers if we need to cater towards the needs of the majority, who are obviously like larger numbers, they have more needs, they have more voting power or more economic power in society, they are more important to be catered to. But the counter towards that is the idea of vulnerability, whereby even if some people are fewer in numbers, it's still important for us to help them, and they still matter because of the fact that otherwise they would be vulnerable and they would not have any other assistance besides the mechanism that we are offering to them, for example. So these are things in which you have to prove as well. Why exactly do certain people matter, to show that you are actually identifying the right stakeholders and that you are actually defending or helping the right people. And why exactly is this point that you're trying to make very important? So any questions so far as to characterizing key actors? All right. Okay. So if we're good, we'll go on towards the next part about proving the outcome. Okay. So once you've identified key actors, right, you want to show that the mechanism that you were trying to build would actually be able to exist. So, or would actually be able to materialize. You want to prove the outcome that you're fighting for. So when does this happen? This happens after you have characterized the people who would be a part of or cause cause this outcome, so that a direct link is drawn. Because sometimes you get feedback from your judges that there is no link between your characterization and your arguments or your substantives, or this also looks like you're just saying that, oh, you have the right outcomes, but you don't show me how the outcome happens. So it's very important for you to, after having described the people who will be involved in the debate, how exactly would their reactions or would their behavior necessarily lead towards a certain outcome. So how exactly would this outcome happen? What are the structural or organic reasons leading to the outcome? So if, for example, what we want is a policy to help people get better access to education, right? Who are the people that you need in order for you to actually make policies? You need the politicians. And in order for the politicians to be involved, you need people who to be able to pressure the politicians into making certain actions or into initiating certain discussions to happen within the parliament, for example. And so these are things that you need in order to prove that the outcome will happen, the structural and organic reasons. If we're talking about organic reasons often looks like things that happen naturally. So the very existence of certain grassroots movements, for example, could probably result in an organic change in the sense that people are eventually going to take notice, there is going to be more awareness. These are natural consequences of things. But regardless of whether it's a structural reason that needs to be proven, why exactly the characters, why exactly would the actors want to act in such a manner to lead towards that change in the first place, or whether it's something that happens entirely naturally, you need to prove why exactly will this happen. And which leads us towards the next part. Why exactly is this outcome likely to happen than what the opponent might want to fight for? So this is also where you start to include comparatives, whereby even if, for example, you're coming prime minister and you have yet to hear what exactly is going to come from your opposition, from a leader of opposition, this is also where you need to start comparing what exactly would a likely outcome be in their world, and what exactly does your outcome look, and what exactly does your outcome look likelier to happen than the opponents. Then the third part is, why exactly does this outcome matter? So it could be its magnitude. How many people does it affect? And where exactly, okay, I'm not sure why I put where here, but more often than not, why your outcome matters is because of the magnitude of the impact that you provide towards these people. So even if, and I think an important part for you to note is you have to always have a contingency plan. Even if your outcome doesn't work, which you would have to concede is likely, that sometimes you want to fight for policy changes, but even after you prove all the reasons why that policy change might necessarily happen, because you get politicians to support, or you get awareness and support from a certain group of community of people, right? You need to always take into consideration that there must always be an even if your outcome doesn't happen, why exactly is this thing that you're fighting for so important, and who exactly is affected by the entire process? So in this even if, it's important for you to detail what exactly are the benefits that you get in the process leading up towards this outcome. So the entire process of people being more aware, getting more detailed reports on how exactly do certain politicians behave, for example, or getting the idea of who exactly will you or getting or being able to scrutinize the actions of certain parties and be able to hold them accountable even if you don't reach a certain outcome. These are all benefits that are only that can only accrue if you actually are able to carry out this process in the first place. And you compare that to a world in which opposition is debating in, whereby none of this might happen, or even if it happens marginally. It doesn't give much of an impact towards the people who are most impacted. So remember here to always emphasize on why exactly is your outcome better. All right. Are we clear on substantives, on characterizing key actors and proving the outcome so far? Does anyone have any question? Hold on. Let's see. All right. Okay. So let's go towards the next part. Okay. The next part is preemption. So I guess it's probably worth noting that preemption isn't something that only a prime minister needs to do, because as a team in general, you always need to preempt in your debate, in your prep, what exactly will the opponent come up with, and this happens throughout the prep. It doesn't happen at like one point of the prep only. So when you are drafting arguments, when you are starting to like create a model, or you want to characterize certain actors, for example, you think of what your opponent could argue in response, and you think of what they might describe certain things as. And it helps you to prepare well and extinguish any doubt that your opponent may later cast from the very start. So well, it's not necessary to like flesh out, here are our preemptions. They will tell you that this. It doesn't have to be listed out before your speech starts as a whole, you know. It doesn't have to be a specific part of your speech whereby you mention all your preemptions, but it has to be integrated throughout your speech, whereby when you're explaining a certain actor, you've said that actor A is more likely to do this. You can include there that while opposition might tell you a different thing, or they might tell you that they will not act in such manner because of this. We don't think that that's likely because of the very fact that actor Act is more likely to do this instead because of structural reasons that have led them towards those circumstances. So what this does is that you look as if when preparing that, when you're delivering that speech, you will look as if someone who knows well and is able to prepare well, and you're able to extinguish any doubt that will happen, because you're able to see, or you're able to expect what exactly will come up from your opponent at the end of the day. And then the third thing is that it allows you to frame your arguments better, because when you are aware of what angle the opponent could possibly take and can engage with what their framing could be, when you are aware of what angle the opponent could possibly take, you will be able to better engage with what their framing could possibly be. Yeah. So if you were to frame certain another group of people as the most vulnerable, as the ones that you want to help the most, for example, you would be able to show early on in your speech why exactly will these harms that you want to prove not exist. So you're able to create better safety nets in order for your team to move forward, in order for your model to be considered the most important and the most relevant one. So also another thing that you need to preempt is that when you're prepping, think at best, what could their case possibly achieve? Because I feel like it's very tempting for us to only want to engage with their worst case scenario and point out all their flaws and all the reasons why their case would not work. But that's not exactly going to help you, especially if they have a pretty convincing case of why exactly would their model work as well. So even in their best case scenario, why exactly is your outcome still better? This is like considering and comparing like your worst case scenario to their best case scenario. Why exactly is the world in which you're trying to create still one that is more beneficial, protects the most people, and is able to accomplish like the goal that you want to accomplish or that you've set for your team in the first place? So do preempt, and do make sure that everyone in the team is aware of like what exactly you're preempting. So like, for example, if you're going second or if you're going third, for example, you need to tell, I mean, this is not something that you keep to yourself. It's something that you have to communicate with your teammate. I feel like they're going to do this. So how can we address that early on? We can probably include that in our argument or in our setup in order for us to be able to eliminate that problem or that harm altogether. All right. So that is why preemption is important. Any questions on preemption? You good? You good? All right. Okay. I hope you guys are still with me. Okay, let's. All right. Okay. So let's try together. All right. I am expecting this to hopefully be an interactive session. So please do this with me, because after we try this together, we're also going to have you guys prep on one motion and try to deliver a 2 to 3 minutes prime minister speech for all of us to learn from and for us to correct each other. So let's try together on the motion this house would ban unpaid internships. So would anyone like to tell me what exactly is the first thing that we need to do as Prime Minister in this motion? Anyone?
Identify keywords.
All right. Okay. So if we were to identify keywords, correct. So what are the keywords that you see here?
Ban. And
Okay. Correct. Ben?
Unpaid internships.
I'm sorry?
Unpaid internships.
Yeah. Okay. Also works. Unpaid internship. So these are the two things that the debate will have to be about. Banning and unpaid internships. All right. So now that you've identified those two keywords, the next thing that you want to do is to know how exactly would you set up the debate. So what are the questions that we went through earlier in order for us to set up the debate? What are things that we need to consider and ask ourselves? All
Why
right.
is this necessary?
Who does it affect?
Yep, correct. Who does it affect? Correct.
How exactly internships work?
Can also something that we can consider. How do internships work? Probably something that we also want to identify is why is there a prevalence of unpaid internships? Because in order for us to solve a problem, we must first see what exactly is the root of the problem. So why do unpaid internships exist, for example? All right. Anything else? Anyone wants to add any more questions or any more things that we want to consider?
How are we going to ban?
What was it? Who are we going to ban?
How? The mechanism? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Also something that we will want to consider. How are we going to ban? All right, okay. So now that we have these questions right, so who does it affect? Who does it affect? Who does unpaid internships affect the most? And in order for that to also work, who are the ones who are perpetrating the harm? Who are the ones who often provide unpaid internships in the first place? All right. So let's see. Who are the ones who are affected? I think we can agree that unpaid internships often affect the youth. This could be high school graduates who are looking for internships prior to entering a university degree. This also looks like university students who have to accomplish certain internship criteria or requirements before they're actually able to graduate, for example. So in general, the problem of unpaid internship harms people who are still students or who more often than not have yet to earn their own money, for example. Additional characteristics. Who exactly provides unpaid internships or are the source of the problem?
I think like government and like non-profitable organization or company.
Correct. I mean, the government also is guilty of the problem because of the fact that they either A, do it as well, or B, they don't create certain policies that prevent unpaid internship from happening. Non-profitable organization also correct. Like NGOs, they don't get profit, so they don't exactly have the revenue to actually pay for the internships. Something that we can consider or we can preempt as of now might be something strong that opposition might have as well, considering the fact that they can bank on the idea that some companies just don't have enough resources to provide both experience and money at the same time. I think we can also look at small companies that though they are making profit, they're not exactly making enough to be able to provide their interns with a certain amount of payment. Do we want to add anything more or do we think that that's enough for us to move on? All right, okay. So I think we're good with who exactly does it affect and who are the ones who are causing the problem in the first place. How exactly do internships work? Yeah, how exactly do internships work? What are you expected to do during the course of the internship? And remember, you have to frame this in a way in which it would sound awful if they still don't agree that internships should be paid. Yeah. Anyway, how does internships?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can.
How does the internship work? They work as the same as the workers. I mean the real workers do. Like for example, they going to work on 8 and then going home at 5. It's the same time.
Okay. Okay, we can say that. We can see that they are expected to fulfill the same requirements that actual paid workers actually get. And then actual paid, yeah, I'm sorry if that doesn't make much sense. And also we can also mention the fact that their workload is more often than not very burdensome, because like there is an existing and a very much true stigma whereby interns are often overworked and are put in circumstances whereby they have to do certain things that might not even be within their work scope to begin with, right? So in order for us, so that this is something that we can consider, because we also have to bear in mind that opposition might come up and say that no, internship workloads aren't that bad. They're not exactly put through all these things. It's just something that people in general like to exaggerate, for example. So we need to prove why exactly are these hassles that interns are put through actually matter, and why exactly is it true. All right. So then I guess being able to identify already being able to identify certain elements or important characteristics in this debate in order for it to work, having identified the keywords, then the next part becomes how exactly are we going to ban unpaid internships? So remember what we learned earlier, it cannot be something that is too draggy, something that is too over the top. It just has to be something concise, simple, and straight to the point. How exactly will we ban unpaid internships? So maybe things that you want to consider looks like who will be the ones who are going to make sure that it is banned? How will you regulate? Yeah. Who are you going to ensure would no longer have unpaid internships in their respective companies, for example? All right. Okay, so naturally, considering the fact that we want to keep it concise and simple, I think this house would ban unpaid internships. We can probably just picture or we can probably just model it as having the government create actual policies to ensure that and every intern gets a minimum pay that is probably like proportionate to the work that they have to do, and probably also towards the living costs that they have to accrue being an intern, taking into consideration the fact that interns do transport to and fro from work every day, or that they're expected to carry out certain chores that might require them to leave their offices, for example. So probably we would ban by creating policies to ensure that they get a minimum amount of a minimum amount of payment. So this is important to ensure that to ensure that there is no abuse of the policy. Because sometimes if we just say that okay, this house would ban unpaid internships, it might not actually reach the outcome that we want, and we want an outcome whereby the interns are treated fairly, for example. So you need to set certain realistic safety nets in order for you to ensure that your goal is going to work. Do we agree on how exactly should the ban happen, or do you have any more analysis that you want to add on how exactly can the ban be more effective? Agree? We're good? Nothing else to add? Okay. If we all on the same page, then let's look at how exactly will we start to create our substantives. Okay, hold on. Let's first look at what exactly are things that we've talked about previously. Have we done all of it? So we've done the context of the debate. We're able to see like who exactly are affected, why exactly does it happen, etc. So maybe what we want to do next is what is the burden that we want to take? What are the things that we want to achieve by banning the unpaid internship? Anyone wants to share any burden that they feel we can take in order for us to win the debate? Please do share. I mean, there is definitely not going to be an outright wrong or outright correct answer. So just share. What are the things that you think we need to prove in order for us to show that there is and there needs to be a ban of unpaid internship, and that the unpaid internship would necessarily, and that the ban would necessarily lead towards a desirable outcome?
Can I try?
Yeah, sure.
I think the burden for the government, maybe we need to prove that by banning unpaid internships, it will bring advantages. While for the opponent side, they need to prove that by banning unpaid internships, this will give more disadvantages towards the youth, for example.
Okay. I agree. These are things that we can make it achievable. I guess the key is that what you said was absolutely correct. We need to show how exactly is it more advantageous for the youth, or how exactly can we protect the youth better, for example. What we need to do is to make it more specific, because if not, we might run the risk of actually having general advantages that might not be exclusive for our side. So what we want to prove is probably how banning unpaid internships would result in better treatment of youth in the workforce, or better internship experiences for the youth, for example. So something that is much more specific, but correct. Thank you so much for that. Anything else? Anyone else wants to add any more burden that we want to prove, or that we need to prove? Okay, we're good with the burdens. All right. So let's consider that. Let's assume that the first part of this is done. Let's go through modeling. We've already also done modeling, the idea or change that we're proposing. How exactly would that ban look like, right? And we've already made sure that it's concise and clear, and include only what is necessary, and prove why exactly is that necessary. So let's go on towards substantive, right? Okay. On the motion, this house would ban unpaid internships. So we want to firstly characterize key actors. So we've identified that the key actors are the interns themselves, probably the employers, which could be the corporation, could be non-profitable organizations, and the third actor that we also identified was the government, who are responsible in ensuring the quality or the quality or the incentives that workers or interns are supposed to receive. So how do we want to characterize these key actors? Let's look at interns, for example. How exactly do they behave? Doesn't need to be limited to how exactly do they behave. So like, remember, these aren't necessarily the only questions that you need to ask themselves. It can always be tailored and changed to suit what exactly is the debate talking about. So probably like, what are the characteristics of interns? Anyone? What are the characteristics of interns? So they are young people, right? How do young people often behave? Or what do young people have or don't have?
They don't have money.
They don't have money? Is that correct? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay, correct. They don't have money because... Continue. Yeah.
They don't really have experience and knowledge. So basically, every interns like work very hard to achieve that goal.
Okay, they don't have experience or knowledge, which is like exactly why they're planning or they're trying to do internship in the first place, right? Because they're doing internships because they want to gain experience or because they want to add more things on their CV in order for them to look more to represent themselves as more employable in the future. Correct. Okay, any other reasons or any other characteristics of young people in general that we need to consider?
They are dependent.
They are dependent.
Yeah. I mean, through the internship, so they will learn to be independent instead of being dependent. Because some of internship, most of the internship, I guess, these days, staying with their parents, still staying with their parents, and even though they go work, their parents are the one who sent them and whatsoever.
Okay, something that we can keep in mind. And we can weigh out the relevance of certain things later. So as of now, it's something that we can take note of. When we want to present our ideas later, we can probably make sure to structure it in a way in which one needs to be prioritized and which one should be kept either like later on or can be not mentioned in the speech at all. So that depends on how we want to prioritize it later. Probably another thing that we want to take note of is the fact that they're interns or the fact that, for example, if they're still students like fresh graduates from high school, for example, these are often people without a voting power or without political power. So these might not be people who can fight for certain policies themselves. So they're often forced to accept certain conditions of living. So even if they might not necessarily agree with the idea of unpaid internships, these are people who do not have any other alternative to resort to in order to ensure that there is change. Do you get what I mean by that one?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So probably okay. That is how they behave. Or like the nature of them as a whole. What are the structural reasons for their behavior? What are the structural reasons for their behavior? Or what are the structural reasons causing them to be in such a plan? I don't think for this debate precisely there are like structural reasons for their behavior as per se. Probably just the fact that they're still young people. They are unable to access certain things because of their age. And the very fact that the education system, probably what we can mention is that the education system or the way in which employments work in state school is that they're expected to have as many experiences as possible within their resume in order for them to be accepted to certain positions or to be able to have or to be granted certain opportunities. So probably something that we might want to consider when we're actually fighting against unpaid internships, because if it is something that is forced upon them by society or by the way the world works in general, then it's not fair for them to actually have to go through and pay through everything themselves if it's actually what they need to do or if it's actually a necessity in order for them to gain those experiences in the first place. So why exactly do these interns matter? Why exactly should we prioritize them? So maybe here we can include a bit of a preemption, or we can probably like guess what exactly is opposition going to say, because opposition might want to defend the idea of how corporations cannot be expected to pay every intern that works with them because that's a large number of workers. So they might probably want to protect they probably want to protect the corporations that are smaller a bit more. But another thing that they might also say is that if we have too many unpaid if we have the requirement that all interns must be paid, then less people are actually going to get the opportunity to become interns because companies will definitely lower down their numbers, for example. So why exactly then should we prioritize the intern, that regardless of what exactly happens next or whether or not they will become like lesser internship opportunities, etc., why exactly do these people matter? Why do we want to protect interns? Anyone? Why is the interns why are the interns the ones that we need to protect?
Because they are the future workers.
Yeah, I think that's possible. We can definitely paint it in that manner as well. I mean, if they gain enough relevant experiences, these are the human capital that we're setting up the world for. These are the people who necessarily be like more like better equipped in the workforce later. Sure. Anyone else? Why do we want to protect the interns?
Because the intern doesn't have structural power. So if something happened to them, nothing can be done. And I believe that they are the one who are being exploited right now.
Okay, all right, also makes sense because remember that we also need to position that our model is the one that is more important, right? So there may be a lot of other ways in which you can ensure that that interns are treated better in workforces, for example. But this is where you can also connect the line as to why exactly is a ban the most important or the best way to do it. Because when you're able to prove that when you're able to paint the picture that these are people without any sort of power, that the interns, the youth who are being interns are actually those without any form of structural or political power to begin with, you don't have anyone else that you can depend on. This is where having a policy which outright bans unpaid internship creates the best solution and the most relevant solution that all of these interns can depend on, instead of like setting individual regulations for corporations, for example. At least this helps create a safety net for all youth in general. All right. So I guess this also links back to this also links immediately to why exactly is this important? How exactly is protecting interns from exploitation, for example, important? So let's look at the second part, which is proving the outcome. So after you've characterized the people, you've characterized the intents, for example, probably what we haven't done, but what you can do briefly now is to also analyze the incentives of certain corporations, for example. Like corporations are in such a manner whereby they have enough resources in order for them to move their business forward. They have a lot of experience. I mean, if these are corporations whereby interns seek opportunities, we have to paint it in such a manner whereby they are likelier to actually be corporations that are actually renowned. Because we always all want to go towards corporation that we think we can have the most learning experience from. So it's safe to say that a lot of the corporations or a lot of the organizations or firms that people go to in general to have internships with are those that are experienced, have enough resources, and that are known for the goods and services they provide, for example. So they should be people who are well equipped and should be able to provide unpaid internships in comparison to the definition that opposition might bring to you about how these might be small businesses, etc. But let's see, right? How exactly would this outcome that you want of students actually, or like the youth in general, actually getting like a more quality experience of work, quality internship experience in the first place happen? How would this outcome happen? So why exactly? Let's consider the fact that opposition might say that now corporations might give lesser jobs towards students to become interns as a whole because they cannot afford to give unpaid internships. Why might that not be the case? What are the incentives of the corporation to act otherwise? And why is this incentive making our outcome like clear? Anyone? Would corporations really not give internships opportunities anymore if there is a certain payment that they have to pay towards their people, towards their interns? Is that really logical? Because remember, right, sometimes people like to paint debates into absolutes. If this happens, then absolutely this will be the outcome. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There's always going to be a scale of the likelihood of something happening. And what we need to do is to always find where we stand on that scale and show why exactly is it likely to tilt the other way. So, of course, some people might say that when, I mean, like the quick assumption is that once you set a certain amount of pay that you have to give your interns, immediately corporations don't want to do that anymore. How can you disprove it is by actually analyzing the incentives of the actor. So sometimes, I mean, of course, we've tried to analyze the actors as much as possible when we first characterize the significant actors, right? But sometimes we might also need to do more of that when we're responding towards a certain idea, or when we want to preempt or prevent another idea from being pushed by the opposition. So when this comes like things like this, maybe we need to add more examples or more elaboration on what are the incentives of employers. So when you want, why exactly do they give internships? So they give internships probably for two reasons. Number one is because they have a reputation of the company to be upheld. I mean, and sometimes the reputation is dependent on whether or not they're allowing people to test out the waters within their company or not. Are they a company what would be great way to say this? Is this a company that is inclusive and that allows people to actually have a taste of the experience working under this company? Or is this a company that completely closes its doors and do not want to give any opportunities at all? Because if you know for a fact that these are companies that profit a lot and these are companies that are able to pay all of your workers like a hefty amount of money but refuse to pay interns, for example, then there's obviously going to be bad for your reputation, right? And corporations care about your reputation. That's the first thing. But the second reason why they also give internship is because they want to source out certain talent pools, for example. They want to find out who exactly are people that they can pull into their workforce permanently in the future. And this might also be something that you want to point out, like, because of this reason, then even if there is a certain amount of payment, they would still be willing to pay it, because to have a good quality worker who understands, like who knows the ropes of what it's like, or who have been introduced towards the culture of working in a company beforehand, who have the chance of enhancing the productivity of your company in general, these are things that are very valuable for your company in the long term. And these are the incentives that a corporation has. Hence, which is why this outcome is likely to happen than what the opponent is going to prove to you. Why exactly does this outcome matter? Because probably now not only do you get a better working experience for your PR for the interns, right? Like the interns, knowing for a fact that they're not working unpaid, that they're not doing unpaid labor, that they're actually getting paid for it, they might also actually be more incentivized in doing better, in performing better in their internship. For example, we can also talk further about how exactly this would increase probably engagement between the intern and the workplace, like because they know that there is a direct link, they're actually being paid for it. It creates a stronger incentive for the interns to work better. For example, do you think that our discussion so far is clear? Anything else that you think we need to mention that we have yet to mention in our discussion so far? Anything else you want to add? Everything okay?
The bottom line of the outcome.
I'm sorry?
The bottom line of the outcome.
Okay, well, what would you say is the bottom line of the outcome?
The worst case scenario, at least we on the side government create some form of incentive for the firm to give something of value to the interns.
Correct. So it's important to have, like I said earlier, and even if, right? So even if like our most preferable benefits do not materialize, even if like we don't get like extremely benevolent corporations who want to give the best experience towards their interns. At the very least, we protect the interns who need these experiences and who are powerless to actually go against these corporations or employers themselves. So what you need to do at the end of the day is to emphasize that even if this doesn't happen, this process as a whole means that you get to protect the interns. In a comparison to a world whereby this ban does not exist, corporations are free to exploit the interns however they want. You will never be able to create like a safety net that these people can fall back on and that they can rely on to ensure that their rights as workers, as interns even, are protected. All right, good job, good job. I feel like that's important to point out as well. All right, are we clear with that? Are we okay to move forward? Because the next part is where you guys have to prep, and I want to hear what you guys have to say. We clear with that? Anything you want to clarify before we get to the next part, please do so. Okay, all right. Yeah?
The burden that you have mentioned just now that that needs to be achievable and so over. So is it like the end of our debates goal? Or
Can you please repeat the last part?
or is it the burdens? Is it like our goals in our debate?
Yeah, correct. The burden is our goal in the debate. Correct. I mean, I feel like it's a goal in our debate. I'm honestly not necessarily the best person at identifying burdens. It's something that I am also trying to work on myself. But your burdens should always be things that you want to prove throughout your debate and that you want to achieve by the end of your debate. All right. So also a reminder on the fact that you don't always have to mention all your burdens beforehand, because sometimes if you like list down all your burdens before your speech, then you're like, for example, if these are not things that you are able to prove throughout your speech, this will be something that your opponent will weaponize against you, and that they will use it against you to show that these are things that you haven't fulfilled, therefore you're not worthy of a win, yada yada yada. You don't want that to happen. So even if, I mean, you don't have to say, these are my burdens in today's debate. I'll do this. That's not necessary. You can just go ahead and start with your substantives, and throughout the debate, you'll be able to prove what exactly are the outcomes that you want to achieve. Any other questions before we go further?
Can I just clarify how the argument works? Okay, so we cannot just like simply take points like, oh, we want to talk about factors. So basically we must do it in continuously, like the factors, and then come with the outcome and then what happened. Is that how the arguments actually work?
Yeah, I would say that is how it works. I would also say that to a lot of people, the way in which they structure their arguments differ. But I feel like the way in which they, because you always need to be sure that what you're saying is something that the judge can grasp immediately, because you want the judge to believe in what you're saying. Okay, in order for that to happen, it must be a structure that is easy to follow. So if you go towards, these are the factors why this happened, A, B, C. Based on these factors leading to this is why we think that this outcome is more like based on these factors, this is why our solution is likely to be the most help. And then after that, what exactly will be the outcome of our solution, A, B, C, D. So that's probably how a flow that you would want to consider in order for you to be able to fully explain and analyze everything. Yeah, does that answer your question, or do you need further clarification on anything else?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you for that question as well. Any other questions from anyone? Okay, all right. So if we're good to go, what I'm gonna do next is I'm going to share with you a motion. You guys will each have 10 minutes to prep. If that's okay, 10 minutes to prep. And then what we'll do is we'll have you guys give probably a 2 to 3 minutes PM speech. Even if you guys don't reach substantives or you're unable to form complete substantives, that is fine. I just want to see how well you're able to structure your speech and how well you're able to incorporate what we've already learned in the class beforehand. So I acknowledge the fact that we might not have time for everyone to speak. So I'm willing to accept anyone who wants to volunteer to give a speech, because if you the plus point if you volunteer is that you get to receive constructive feedback, and that you'll definitely know how exactly you can improve in the future in order for you to get better structure. All right. So do volunteer. If there's no volunteers, then I'm afraid I will have to point some people out to give speeches. So it's much better if you guys volunteer. So 10 minutes prep, and then come up with 2 to 3 minutes of a PM speech. So the motion will be, hold on. Okay. This House believes that governments of developing countries should aggressively disincentivize students from pursuing further education overseas. Before I start the time, any clarifications that you guys want to make about the motion? Anything that you don't understand, I can explain it to you. Everyone okay? No necessary clarifications? Okay, so the phrase aggressively disincentivize students here is up for you to decide. How exactly do you want that to happen? Okay, so 10 minutes start from now. I'll see you guys back at 9:26, hopefully with some volunteers who want to share their thoughts. Okay, good luck guys, go prep for 10 minutes. All right, time's up. Okay. So what's going to happen now is that you guys will be giving 2 to 3 minute PM speeches. Not necessarily strict on the time, but mostly about seeing how well you're able to structure your speech. So yeah, do we have any volunteers as to who would want to try first? And then after every speech, maybe besides me, I could give some comments based on what I know. I mean, I'm not exactly the exact expert, so everyone else can also provide constructive comments on what do you think about that speech, and whether or not the speech was clear and structured enough for you to understand. So yeah, do we have any volunteers? Because if we don't have any volunteers, then we will have to call names. So either way.
It's okay, I would
can
like
use
to
them.
volunteer.
All right, okay. Sure,
Okay.
thank you Firdaus for volunteering.
Okay.
Do go ahead.
So do I have like 2 minutes?
2 to 3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
right. Max. Go.
Let's start in 3, 2, 1. A few days ago, we can see in the news that the Malaysian 2021 budget are somewhat unfit for us, especially in these trying times. For those who lose their job, is for the government to support them either by giving subsidies or funding organizations that are aiding those people in need. One more thing to note, especially in the context of today's debate, is that the people who are going to work in the future are in much more danger because even though they graduate, there are no guarantees that they can actually get jobs. And for those certain reasons, it's imperative that we focus on identifying the problem, which is the problem of budgeting and how the government actually spend the money. One thing I want to highlight, which is I believe is the key points that we should look into, is of the cost of studying abroad. By relatively, cost of studying abroad is at least 5 times the local. So by that, we can understand that studying abroad would put a lot of economical restraint, especially when it comes to developing countries. So by this logic, less money would be spent on uh, local. So less money would be able for the government to spend on other students who are actually much more in need. So what does government who are developing are? We believe these are countries like Ghana, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, examples. These are countries that are comparatively behind when it comes to human infrastructure, education, and economical development. That is developing countries. When it comes to aggressively disincentivize students, we believe that this looks like the idea of not giving or not investing a lot in allowing students to study abroad. This is by means is to reduce the number of overseas scholarship, because we don't believe this problem lies with students who actually have the money to go study abroad, but the problem lies with students who don't have the money but have the qualification to study abroad. But comparatively, we believe that the number that you can put, the number of budget you can put to send people abroad should be used to the mass people instead of focusing on some small number of elite and qualified students. So what do I do is, after I already set up, is to look into the modeling. The modeling is when I will talk on the context of what I'm talking about. So what is it? The method, like I say, is to aggressively disincentivize. The reason for this is, as I mentioned before, because there are limited amount of funding. By that, we can understand that it is necessary for the government to do right now, because one thing that we would lose out if we do not disincentivize students is that the a lot of people would be able to even study in the country locally as in right now. So by that, it's better to reduce the number of overseas scholarship and allow much more people to be able to get at least a diploma for free or maybe for loans. But even right now in developing countries, they don't even have enough money to give out loans. What more about scholarship, which is what I believe to be something which is quite important. The substantive is the one that I would like to look into the key actors is the students themselves. These are people who don't actually have a privileged background, and most of them are the majority in these developing countries, because those who are elite, no need to care for them. They have their way to survive. But these are people who are actually in need is one we should help. And because of that, I believe that the outcome that we'll be able to achieve finally is at least in the end of the day, we are willing to lose out in reducing right now, but in hope that maybe in 10 years or the next decade, we would be able to become a developed country, and then we can focus on sending more students abroad. With that, that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Firdaus. I'm sorry I wasn't timing just now. I will be timing for future speeches. I'm so sorry, but thank you for that. I feel like in order for us to be able to give more concise feedbacks as you go later, maybe we should have a few more speeches first so that we can listen to other people, and then we can deduce which one exactly or how exactly can the speeches in general, like whether specifically of a certain individual or in general of everyone else, can actually be improved. So probably if we can have another 2 to 3 speakers, and then we can discuss on the feedback. Anyone else wants to try? Anyone? All right, I will be picking a name. Okay, so all right, can I have a speech from Hadira, please?
Okay.
Okay. No pressure or anything, honestly. Just try to do and incorporate what you've learned.
When we're talking about developing countries who actually okay, so basically this motion is like this house believe that government of developing countries should aggressively disincentivize students from pursuing further education overseas. So we must look at the key point first, which is developing countries, which are the countries that are actually a little bit behind from other countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, and also Thailand, and also other countries. And when we are talking about desensitivized students, we are saying that it is highly not encouraged for those students who even qualify to get the scholarship. But this initiative is basically for certain reasons. So the first one is we believe that government encourage students from pursuing further education overseas basically because of limited financial resources, because of and in especially in these days we are facing with pandemic, and I think it's something that actually could be considered. And also when we're talking about limited financial resources, so basically it also relates to poor currency exchange rate. So basically when we are sending our students to study overseas, it basically it's double and triple the amount of the investment itself. And I believe that this kind of money actually could be invest for something that is more beneficial. For example, instead of sending our students to go go further education overseas, we can actually invest it to our country itself, like by improving our local institution itself. For example, like spending some amount of money for improving our educational systems. For example, provide better facilities and also provide better technology so that students can actually benefits this, because at the end of the day, all students will get the knowledge that they want. It is based and depends on the educational system itself, how the lecture works, how the system actually um, could benefit the students, and how the innovation of the country itself could help the students in getting the education that they need. And also, I think instead of sending students for the education overseas, we can actually use that amount of money by giving financial aids to lot of students, like those who are in needs of getting a few things for their studies, for example, like laptops and allowances for their daily life and also for internet. So I think this basically that we have to point out. So by doing this, we just it actually just not just benefits our students but also our local institution, and it's actually help our image of country itself to be better, especially in education purpose. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Hadira. Okay. Then there's another person. We have time for 2 more speeches, I believe. So any other volunteers after Hadira?
Can I try?
I'll make sure that everyone who gets a speeches now gets appropriate feedback for the speeches.
Can I try?
Anyone volunteer?
Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
Okay,
clearly.
cool. Assalamualaikum and a very good day I bid to all. Ladies and gentlemen, we at the government side never ever want to stop our students from achieving their goals to study overseas in Oxford, Harvard, and Stanford, and maybe want to become the next Albert Einstein. But there are certain circumstances that make us to do so, and that is why we believe that governments of developing countries should aggressively desensitize students from pursuing further education overseas. So there are two crucial keywords in today's debate. First, what is developing countries? A developing country is a country with a less developed industries and a low human development index (HDI) to other countries. They also have a lower nation's GDP per capita compared with other nations. Some of the examples are like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and not to forget Malaysia. So the second keyword is desensitize students from pursuing further education overseas. It sounds lengthy and it is, but it simply means that the government will discourage their local students from studying abroad. So how the government will discourage them? We know there is a particular expenses or monetary provision for the government to support our local student, right? So the financial assistance will not be given to the ones who want to pursue their studies overseas. Sounds crucial and injustice, right? But which students are entitled for this discouragement? We at the government side believe that only students who not pass their language class at their respective country and basic requirement tests to go for international studies, IELTS for example, will be discouraged and would not get any financial assistance from the government. Why? Because did you know that there is a massive problem that most of local students who study abroad manage to acquire straight failed, not straight A's, because they are not strong in the foreign language and are not well prepared for the foreign surrounding. So the opponent might say that the government is trying to stop our youth, our local to bloom and shining, but we would say that we are not, because if local students who are not even know how to speak the foreign language, then how will they manage and survive which will result to further issues. And it is important to bear in mind that today's motion is only pertaining to government, which means if our local students really wanted to study abroad, then they can ask from the non-government organization. Things like the government is trying to stop our local from shining is nonsense. Therefore, at the end of our debate, we will gain two things. First, what is the importance or the advantages by discouraging students that are qualified, that are not qualified to further their studies, and the future of local students from developing countries will be safeguarded. I think that's all for me.
All right, thank you so much. Do I call you Akil or Mujahid?
Akil.
Akil, all right. Thank you, Akil, for that speech. Also to be later given feedback later. One final person. Anyone else who wants to try and give a PM speech? Tick, tick, tick. Anyone? Nope, no one. All right. So if no one is going to volunteer, can I have Shifa to give a Prime Minister speech? Shifa, are you here with us? All right, okay. So if Shifa cannot give a Prime Minister speech, can we have Fatin Alisha? Would that be okay?
Sure. Can I have a moment before I start?
Can. No worries.
This House believes that governments of developing countries should aggressively disincentivize students from pursuing further education overseas. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to propose. So basically, in this debate, we are majorly looking forward to have those funds to like how would be what's the direction of that fund for the incentive that supposedly goes to the students for education overseas purpose gone to. So basically we are trying to propose that not because of the underqualified or qualification, but we are trying to protect the education the educational the education sector in these developing countries. And not only that, we must be noted that the developing countries itself is a country which are in a very, very crucial phase where they are trying to not only develop their education purpose, but they are trying to develop the politics, the law, the economy, even social. And with this motion, we are trying to aim that at the end of the day, we are giving the most benefit towards the developing countries, and not only the developing countries, but we are also trying to give the best advantages towards these students, which they have the chances to further the education overseas. However, we believe that even though they are given the opportunities to pursue the education inside the local university, they can still stand proudly on the same level with the education from overseas. So the burden of proof that we are trying to provide, that at the end of the day everyone will get the benefit. And yes, so basically the first argument from the government side is firstly we are trying to increase and adding on the most development towards these developing countries. Why do I say so? Because let's take a look on the law aspect. So when the students are trying to pursue the education inside our country, particularly Malaysia, right? So Malaysia is a developing country. When they are trying to pursue the education overseas, they do not have the knowledge and also education which they would apply inside our country. Why? Because in Malaysia we have our own laws. It's not applicable to any other countries. So that's why pursuing the education outside our country is very, very useless. Why? Because at the end of the day, you need to still study inside our country to have the same knowledge. So this incentivizing these students would make everyone realize that at the end of the day, we are trying to make people to serve the country. And not only that, we must know that majorly the students that we send to outside, like medical field or even engineering field, most of them have gone outside the overseas, and it's like we are paying their student loans, or we are trying to give scholarships to them for them to work outside, not in Malaysia, and to serve other countries. And that's not what we are trying to imply here. That's a total different case for the rich or wealthy kids who can afford their education overseas. That's not the targeted people that we are trying to imply here. We are trying to say that any students who could serve and they need the government funds to get the education, we are trying to say that they need to work here. So at the end of the day, the benefit would come to the students as well as the country. And no matter how the mechanism, like the agreement said that although you are going to Ireland or even South Korea, you need to work here. At the end of the day, still there are students that doesn't serve the country. That's why we are trying to aggressively incentivizing these students from pursuing further education overseas. And not only that, the other arguments that are coming from us is that the educational funds from these developing countries could be directed in other way, which to increase the productivity of the local countries. Not only because we all know that the ranking university all around the world are given based on the research purpose on its university. So when we disincentivizing the students from pursuing further education overseas, these talented students or these given these knowledgeable students would serve the university in locally, and would give benefits on the ranking and such. So that is why we believe that this house believes that governments of developing countries should aggressively disincentivizing the students from pursuing further education overseas. And with that, I am proud to propose. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for everyone's contribution, for your willingness to give a speech as well. All right. So let's go through one by one of the speeches, right? Let's start with Firdaus. I think Firdaus has a different angle in the way he introduces, which is that he starts with the status quo, the most relevant status quo, which is budgeting, for example, and how exactly has it led towards the idea of prioritizing where should the money be going to. I feel like, okay, probably in the case of Firdaus, one constructive feedback I have for you is that it's much easier to get straight to the point of how exactly does this relate to disincentivizing students from pursuing further education overseas. Because if we don't have it in your opening line, for example, or we don't have it within the first minute of your speech, it's very easy to feel lost and to not understand how does this relate back to the motion. So you want to make it clear as early on as possible. So before you go further on with the idea of how the budget necessarily causes people to lose job, to like have lesser subsidies, for example, you might want to first pinpoint how exactly this mismanagement of where money goes to in the government would later affect like the idea of developing educational institutions within your own country, for example. Besides that, let's see. I feel like structure-wise, you clearly mentioned like what is this, what is going to be your context, what are you setting up, what are your modeling, etc. Which is good. You don't necessarily have to do that all the time. There are times where you can just and you don't specifically have to say that this is my modeling or that this is the first part of my substantive, which is me characterizing the key actors. Doesn't necessarily have to be all fleshed out, but can be fleshed out as well if you feel like that's the easiest way in order for you to have your judges to follow you. In general, I think great job on the speech. But for the first part, make sure to always be clear and concise. Always get straight to the point. Because I don't think I'll be going too much into the kind of points that you're making, the kind of content that you're bringing out with. I'm going more towards the structure in which you present your speech. So if it was to be clear and concise from the very start, at least the judge would see the direction of your team early on. All right. Any questions on that, Firdaus?
So as in the 3 minutes, am I not supposed to elaborate on anything?
Oh, I mean, it doesn't matter if you choose to elaborate further on it later. It's just that you don't have to, it's not compulsory for you to flesh out, like to say specifically, this is my modeling. You can just go ahead and start your modeling without having to say it.
Oh yeah. Also, I have another question. I did learn from somewhere, but I don't recall from where. I was told that in the opening line, you're supposed to give a full summary of your case, as in to make things clear. So, but this is contradictory to the idea of getting straight to the point, or am I wrong?
I feel you can give a brief summary. I mean, I would definitely encourage people to give brief summary of their entire case within their opening line. In this case, however, the opening line that you gave was more of a general idea of what is happening in status quo, which is budget 2021, and doesn't necessarily relate back to the motion. So in order for that to work, you have to relate it to the motion early on. Yeah. Because your part where you relate it to the education, further education part is later on in your speech. Ken?
Got it.
Okay, thank you so much.
If I could add on, hello. Sorry, Anis. If I could add on, Firdaus, 2 things. The first is, if I were to make an opening line that would relate to the entire case and then like also like bring about the current context, I'd probably do it like, oh, developing countries where wealth management is an absolute mess need to stop sending students abroad, especially when the returns are so low and the people on the ground are suffering so much. That is the line I would use. Because it would highlight wealth management issues. It would tie it to the fact that you're sending students abroad is something that's a waste, and the people that you are harming in the process all in one go. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really makes things clear.
Yeah. The second thing is I felt like your angle needed some form of exclusivity, because at the end of both your speech and the second speech that I heard, I was a bit confused as to why, like, this is the only way at which you can solve the problem that is wealth mismanagement, because there are tons of other avenues for like expenditure to be going that way. So if I were you, I would probably also want to like add on a line and say that the specific harm that this causes and why this is so much different than other forms of wealth mismanagement is because of A, B, and C. Maybe. Okay, I'm done.
All right. Thank you so much, Tasmia, for that input. Okay. If I may move on towards Hadira next, so that we can wrap it as soon as possible, hopefully, so that no one is required to stay more than they're expected to. All right. So on Hadira's part, right, I feel like good job as a whole on the structure, but I would add that there are certain points in your speech whereby I feel like you could add some more preemptions as to how where you can directly start comparing towards opposition's case. For example, when you want to talk about how we can improve local education instead if people were to, if the government were to aggressively disincentivize students. I guess probably one way of putting this is that you can or you should be able to firstly define how exactly this aggressive disincentivization looks like, firstly in your clarifications or in your characterization or setting out of the debate. So later, when you're talking about how when you aggressively disincentivize, you can improve local education instead, you can also include here how, what exactly is the message that you are sending when you are aggressively disincentivizing, that you can actually provide as good of or as much a much better educational experience within your country, for example. And to this, you can probably early on preempt what might come from opposition, which is that you get better quality education overseas, or that you get students with more extensive skills, for example. So maybe in that circumstance, you might want to be able to preempt a little bit more there, but overall, still a great job on the way in which you structured and presented your speech. Any questions from Hadira?
So meaning that when I said about desensitized students, I need to point out clearly at the first place, then I can come out with the solution.
Correct. Because sometimes you need to prove like if you want to talk about how you want to have local education exist. I mean, how you want to improve local education. What you need to also prove is why exactly does this require you to aggressively disincentivize students first. So you need to first show why when you without aggressively disincentive. First, you need to show what aggressively disincentivizing mean. And then secondly, when in your speech you're trying to show, when you're trying to say that local education can flourish better or can be better improved, why can't this happen in a world whereby students are still encouraged to go overseas? You know, so there's a direct link between the problem and the outcome that you're trying to prove. Because if not, opposition can just say, oh, that can exist both ways. Even if you still send students overseas, you can still be able to improve your local education. So why is that something that is exclusive?
Thank you.
Would that be helpful? All right, okay. Feel free to ask me personally later on if there's any additional questions. Thirdly, Akil. So Akil, I feel like you're the kind of person that's very clear in the way in which you speak. And that is something that is very good, because I feel like it was very easy to follow where exactly are you heading, and I really appreciate the fact that you tried to point out the keywords beforehand, what exactly are the things that we need to focus on, etc. Probably under your will, I would say under your speech, what I would give feedback on is on the idea of prioritization of what you want to see as a prime minister, because while you may or may not eventually make an argument on whether who should be the students who get to go, I'm like students who pass certain things or who don't pass certain things. Probably the real issue would be like what exactly is the problem of pursuing further education overseas to the extent where you need to aggressively disincentivize students. So probably look at a bigger picture whereby it's not just about them going and failing after they reach there because of the fact that they lose out on certain things, that they're not able to master the language, etc. But more specifically on what is the outcome towards the government, to the extent that it's in the government's interest to stop them from pursuing further education overseas. So maybe one characterization or analysis that you want to make beforehand is what are the incentives of the government. And this also applies to both probably like both Firdaus and Hadira's case earlier as well. Maybe you want to also mention early on what are the incentives of the government, to the extent that they are the parties who should aggressively disincentivize these students from pursuing further education overseas. Is that okay? Akil, do you have any questions that you want to clarify with me?
So far, no. Yeah, it's very clear, your explanation.
All right, but it's still the same as everyone. If you feel like you need more explanation, feel free to meet me later on. Text me later on so that we can discuss further if you want to. Thank you for that speech, very clear. I really appreciate that. Lastly, for Alicia, hold on, let me see my notes. Direction of the fund, trying to protect education subsector, aim, benefit for other students, and to increase and add on. Okay, I feel like similar to Hadira, I would say, in that in order for you to prove certain things, the problem that you want to paint must at first be evident in order for you to tie back certain solutions or certain outcomes that you want to prove in your speech. So when you want to talk about how you want to increase or add on more development, similarly, you need to prove why exactly is that development unattainable in a world whereby students are insistent on pursuing further education overseas. So probably still similarly, a bit more characterization on how exactly this aggressive disincentivizing would look like, and how does that differ from status quo. So probably in the idea of relating to status quo, probably the very fact that there are a lot of scholarships and that there are a lot of incentives given by government for students to study overseas itself is sending a message that the local education is not good enough. Or the very fact that a lot of students that are highly qualified are sent overseas instead of staying locally means that the government is not actually making a real effort to improve the education, which is why they consistently send their students overseas, for example. So there's no incentive for them to actually repair local institutions. So probably a bit more linking from your problem to your solution so that we can have a better idea as a whole of how exactly is your case the best model in order for us to solve the problem, because we always want to prove the exclusivity of our case, right? But yeah, any questions, Alicia?
I think no, I'm good.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who gave speeches earlier. I really appreciate it. If anyone else wants to add anything further later on, please feel free to do so. But let's go into a quick wrap up of what are things that we learned today. So important takeaways. The first is that you have to be specific with what you want, and that your speech must also be clear and be specific in what exactly is the case direction of your speech. Who exactly are you trying to help? What exactly are you trying to benefit from? So be sure to be specific in the way in which you deliver and present your ideas. The second thing is to prioritize only what you need. So it might be tempting to take up certain arguments or certain angles, but you don't have all the time in the world. You only have 7 minutes to deliver your speech. So prioritize what you need to, so the opposition bench cannot come up and say that you never did any of these in your speech before. The third is to take only achievable burdens so that you don't overwork yourself or overburden yourself with things that are difficult to prove. And because this will also mean leaving yourself bare towards your opponents. We don't want that to happen. The fourth is to always prove the links that are necessary. So this is also what I've been giving feedback to you guys earlier, to always prove the links in order for you to make an argument work, or in order for you to make a characterization or a problem matter. And the last thing is to always remind the judge why your case matters the most. So regardless of how convincing the case coming from opposition sounds, you need to always be able to ensure that you can, that the outcome that you're providing and the incentive that you're giving, for example, the solution that you have is something that is much more efficient and much more effective in comparison to the ones that they are giving you, and that it helps your stakeholders the most. All right. I feel like that's the end of our, now you can ease that Prime Minister's speech. But before we completely and officially end things, any last questions from anyone? I don't want to keep you guys too long as well. Anything else you want to add? Okay. All right. I'll assume there's nothing. If that is the case, feel free to approach me if you want to